It's November 8th here in Seoul, and I'm Kim Dami. We begin with these stories making the headlines at this hour, starting with another rate cut by the U.S. Federal Reserve. The Fed lowered its key interest rate again by a quarter percentage point, now bringing the target rate to the 4.5% to 4.75% range. Stocks closed positive with the S&P 500 and Nasdaq ending at record highs. Russian President Vladimir Putin suggests Russia could hold military exercises with North Korea, while Ukraine continues to claim North Korea lost soldiers in the Kursk region. President Yoon offered an apology to the nation on Thursday for causing concern to the people over controversies involving the First Lady and a political consultant, and he promised to revamp state affairs to meet public expectations. We begin in the U.S. The Federal Reserve went ahead with another rate cut, signaling a continued easing of monetary policy. Our Moon Hae-ryun starts us off.
The Federal Reserve has cut rates once again as inflation and labor market conditions in the United States show signs of easing. On Thursday local time following the Federal Open Market Committee meeting, Fed policymakers slashed its benchmark interest rate by 25 basis points, bringing it down to the 4.5 to 4.75% range.
We continue to be confident that with an appropriate recalibration of our policy stance, strength in the economy and the labor market can be maintained, with inflation moving sustainably down to 2%.
September's personal consumption expenditures price index, a key measure of inflation, showed that the rise of year-on-year inflation fell to 2.1%. While Fed Chair Jerome Powell commented that job market conditions remain solid. This latest decision from the U.S. Central Bank follows a big rate cut of half a percentage point in September, which was the first significant rate cut since 2020. Markets had largely anticipated a quarter-point rate cut at this meeting, leading to stocks closing higher on Thursday, continuing the strong rally fueled by Donald Trump coming out on top in the presidential election. The benchmark S&P 500 and tech-heavy Nasdaq both closed at a record high. With the Fed's press conference coming just 2 days after the presidential elections, Powell stated that the results would not factor in their monetary policy decisions in the near future. He also answered questions about the possibility of stepping down if Trump, a known critic of Powell, requested his resignation with a no, and emphasized that he believes a president does not have the legal authority to remove Fed governors from their positions. This latest decision brings the interest rate gap between South Korea and the U.S. back down to 1.5 percentage points once again. The gap had widened to 1.75 percentage points after the Fed's big rate cut in September and the Bank of Korea's smaller rate cut of 25 basis points last month. The BOK is scheduled to hold its final monetary policy meeting of the year at the end of November. As the Fed expects to cut rates further, although it's not clear how quickly cuts will come, eyes are on how the BOK will respond. Moon Hae-ryun, Arirang News.
Now, there's still one more Fed meeting left on December 18th. Will the final Fed decision be affected by Trump's return in any way? We're joined by Professor Greg Butchek. Welcome back, Professor Butchek.
Thanks for having me.
So, Fed Chair Jerome Powell said it won't. What's your take on it, Professor?
Yeah, I mean, so the U.S. economy has been right on track in terms of unemployment and inflation. The Fed has been comfortably, slowly bringing down interest rates from their highs earlier in the year, and the expectation is just for another rate cut for things to continue apace as they have been. The Fed has always been very careful to maintain its political independence. I don't think Trump's victory will impact that. And I do think Powell will continue to act independently regardless of who is president. If you recall, Trump was the one who appointed Powell, although they've had some public conflicts, and Trump has been sort of unusual in publicly criticizing Powell. But Powell, to his credit, sort of came out and said today he wouldn't leave if Trump asked him to, and that he thinks that Trump lacks the legal authority to fire him. Now, the main way I can see politics entering the Fed's decision-making will be a little more in the future, which is who ultimately replaces Powell after his term ends in 2026. I don't think the new chair would be politically motivated per se, but it is likely that Trump is going to look for a chair whose views sort of largely mirror Trump's and who shares a similar economic strategy.
Well, Wall Street welcomed the news of Donald Trump's victory, with three of its indexes hitting new all-time highs on Tuesday, Wednesday. Now, but I hear it's not the best news for the Korean stock markets. The question is, why is that?
Sure. Well, so U.S. markets were higher. Rates on U.S. Treasuries were also higher. Kind of one interpretation is a very positive one for the U.S. Markets expect more growth under Trump due to tax cuts or deregulation. But the higher Treasury rates in particular may also sort of reflect an expectation of higher future inflation related to Trump's tariffs and higher deficits. So economists broadly, including me, think these tariffs are a very bad idea, and it would lead to much higher prices for consumers in the U.S., much worse than the inflation we saw post-COVID. And then, as you mentioned, for Korean stocks, I think these moves lower are really about the fear of tariffs. Additionally, these tariffs would hurt Korean companies through reduced exports to the U.S. This is likely to have the largest impact on companies that rely a lot on exports as opposed to selling domestically. And I think market prices are really reflecting the possibility that these tariffs may be passed in the future.
Before we talk more about Trump's tariffs, let's talk about the South Korean one. One tumbled right after Trump secured his second term in the Oval Office. Could you explain what happened?
Sure. I mean, I think it's related to this fear of tariffs. So if tariffs are imposed on Korean exports to the U.S., the quantity of those exports would decrease. And if American companies are buying less from Korea, it means there's a lower demand for Korean won relative to dollar to make those purchases. So this pushes down the value of the won relative to the dollar. I think also partly this is a reaction just to the higher interest rates I mentioned in the U.S. When U.S. interest rates rise, that tends to be good for the dollar.
Well, Trump will no doubt want to tariff China as high as 60%, which will be a big blow to South Korea, considering we are heavily dependent on exports. How should South Korea, do you think, brace for the possible impact?
Sure. Well, I think it really depends on the details of the tariffs, and often we don't know the details until Trump presents them. If U.S. tariffs only fall on China, that could be good for Korea as Korean exports become relatively more competitive. But if Trump implements these across-the-board tariffs that he's mentioned from time to time, including on South Korea, that would certainly reduce Korean exports to the U.S. I think sort of more broadly, major exporter countries like China, like Korea, are not in a great position to absorb sort of excess exports globally. And also big importer countries like the U.S. and some countries in the Euro, they're sort of in the midst of enacting more protectionist policies. And that's just not good news for countries that rely a lot on exporting their goods.
Well, Trump said himself that tariff is his favorite word, so we have to, brace and prepare in any way. Now, Trump mentioned also that U.S. wants to work with South Korea in the shipbuilding industry, especially in naval shipbuilding. What kind of aid do you think Trump is really talking about here?
Yeah, so I mean, broadly, the United States is interested and has been interested in building a stronger coalition of Asian partners, really to help counter China. And South Korea is a major part of that coalition. South Korean shipbuilding is a dominant player globally, especially compared to the U.S., where there's really relatively little shipbuilding. And I think, many of Trump's ideas are sort of light on details, but the aid could take the form of either direct orders from Korean shipbuilders or joint ventures in Korea or in the U.S. I have something in mind. Maybe it looks a little similar to the TSMC plant that recently began operations in Arizona. You could see sort of an analogous thing happening in the U.S. with some Korean partners. Now, given the strength of Korea's shipbuilding industry, this seems like a really natural partnership, although it's a little hard to tell how this interacts with Trump's calls for tariffs. However, we saw last time when he was president, often the ideas sort of come out difficult to understand in an internally consistent way. You could imagine this looks something like, well, there's tariffs on Korean imports, except for strategically important industries like shipbuilding.
Right, at least we have something to look back on 4 years ago. Alrighty, Professor Butchek, thanks so much for connecting with us all the way from D.C. this morning. You enjoy your evening there.
Thank you very much.
And U.S. President Joe Biden on Wednesday promised a peaceful transfer of power, a day after the U.S. presidential elections, which saw Donald Trump defeat Vice President Kamala Harris. Speaking at the White House, Biden called on Americans to accept Trump's victory and vowed an orderly transfer of power. During a congratulatory phone call to Trump, Biden also said he promised to direct the entire government to work with his team to ensure a peaceful and orderly transfer of power. Now, the U.S. president also called the recent election honest, fair, and transparent. Russian President Vladimir Putin has noted the possibility of his country and North Korea conducting joint military drills. Now, the hint came as Ukraine continues to point out there have been casualties among North Korean troops in combat against Ukraine. Lee Seung-jae reports.
According to TASS news agency on Thursday, Russian President Vladimir Putin raised the possibility of Moscow and Pyongyang holding joint military exercises. During his remarks, he cited the Comprehensive Strategic Partnership Treaty he signed with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un in June. The treaty includes a mutual defense clause for military assistance in the event of aggression by another state. Putin added that the treaty is nothing new, comparing it to a previous Soviet-era treaty that has since expired. Meanwhile, Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky announced on Thursday that some of the 10,000 North Korean troops deployed to the Kursk region were involved in combat, resulting in casualties. However, Zelensky did not mention the scale of North Korean casualties. He added that if no corresponding measures are taken in regard to the North Korean troop deployment, more will be sent to Russia to assist them in the ongoing war. When asked about U.S. President-elect Donald Trump's plan to end the war soon, the Ukrainian president said he did not know such details and had not discussed the situation with Trump. Zelensky also raised skepticism that Trump could end the war quickly, while stressing that entering into ceasefire negotiations without security guarantees could be very dangerous. Meanwhile, U.S. Department of Defense Deputy Spokesperson Sabrina Singh says the Pentagon cannot confirm whether North Korean troops have engaged in battle with Ukrainian soldiers yet. However, she noted that given the fact that the troops are in Kursk, the possibility of them being engaged in battle is high. Singh says the Pentagon's assessment is that there are 10,000 to 11,000 North Korean troops in Kursk, but added that Pyongyang has not yet deployed additional troops. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
A United Nations meeting on North Korean human rights took place in Geneva on Thursday, but the North completely denied accusations of human rights violations and instead blamed the U.S. Payne has the details.
For the first time in around 5 years, member states of the United Nations gathered in Geneva to address the issue of human rights in North Korea. The Universal Periodic Review, or UPR, is a mechanism that calls on each UN member state to go through a peer review of its human rights record every 4.5 years. The North Korean representative at the meeting denied all accusations of human rights violations and blamed the United States for getting in the way of protecting its people's human rights, adding that human rights means national sovereignty to the North.
The efforts of the DPRK to ensure its people full enjoyment of their rights are confronted with a series of challenges and obstacles, such as the political and military provocations and anti-DPRK human rights campaigns of the United States, deeply rooted in its extremely hostile policy towards the DPRK.
The U.S. Special Envoy on North Korean human rights issues at the meeting called on Pyongyang to dismantle political prison camps and release unjustly detained political prisoners. Thousands of people are believed to be detained in political prison camps, where they have been subjected to torture and harsh labor. But another North Korean official stressed that there are no such things as political prisoners or political prisoner camps in the North. He claimed that there are only criminals who committed anti-state offenses and that there are not many of them in number. Meanwhile, South Korea publicly brought up the issue of Korean detainees in North Korea, the first time for Seoul to do so at a Universal Periodic Review meeting.
Immediately resolve the issues of abducted detainees and unrepatriated prisoners of war, as well as the issues of separated families, and particularly promptly release 6 Korean nationals who are held against their will by the DPRK.
There are currently 6 South Koreans detained in North Korea, including 3 missionaries, Kim Jong-uk, Kim Guk-gi, and Choi Chung-gil. They have been held captive for as long as 11 years, while their whereabouts and fates are unknown. Payne, Arirang News.
2 people are dead and 12 more are missing after a fishing vessel sank early Friday morning off Jeju Island. According to the Korea Coast Guard, a report was received around 4:33 a.m. on Friday that the 129-ton trawler 135 Kimsongo was sinking about 24 kilometers northwest of Pyeongdo Island in Jeju. Now, of the 27 people on board, 16 Koreans and 11 foreigners, 15 were found in nearby vessels and transported to a hospital in Jeju. Of these 15, 2 Korean crew members were confirmed to have died after being taken to hospital. The Korea Coast Guard and Navy are searching for the 12 missing crew members, while President Yoon has ordered a full-scale rescue operation. President Yoon addressed the nation in a televised speech on Thursday, where he offered an apology for causing public concern over recent political controversies, especially surrounding the First Lady. Our top office correspondent Kim Do-yeon has the details.
At his halfway mark address and press briefing on Thursday, the first thing President Yoon did was to apologize for recent criticism against him over his connections to an obscure political consultant, Tae-gyun.
대통령이라는 것은 변명하는 자리가 아닙니다. 모든 것이 제 불찰이고 제 부덕의 소치입니다. 국민 여러분께 먼저 죄송하다는 말씀, 진심 어린 사과의 말씀부터 드리고 그리고 이 국정 브리핑을 진행하겠습니다.
This was the biggest issue at hand building up to the briefing. The main opposition, the Democratic Party of Korea, leaked a recorded phone call between then President-elect Yoon and Myung, during which they discussed the ruling party's candidate selection process ahead of a by-election in 2022. A president or president-elect shouldn't be interfering in party politics. Also, other recordings surfaced that showed First Lady Kim Gun-hee's connection with Myung and her possible involvement in politics. President Yoon denied any wrongdoing but accepted that he should have acted more cautiously when he became a politician. President Yoon did acknowledge that it was his fault for not changing the means of communication for him and his wife after becoming a public figure.
이게 전부 제 책임입니다. 왜냐하면 후보 시절과 또 당선인 시절과 대통령이 됨으로써 이 소통의 방식을 좀 매정하지만 바꿔야 됩니다.
Continuing on domestic politics, President Yoon also faced questions regarding what looks like a fallout with the ruling People Power Party chair Han Dong-hoon, who has been a close confidant of Yoon's since the two's prosecutor days, claiming that a part of that is from the media stirring more conflict. He also said, when both the top office and the ruling party work diligently together to deliver to the public, their relationship will naturally improve over time. President Yoon's answers to foreign policy questions were also highly anticipated as he came into the briefing just a couple hours after his phone call with U.S. President-elect Donald Trump. Concerns have been rising that the America First policy could impact South Korea's industries, but President Yoon instead showed optimism.
제가 트럼프 대통령이 얘기하는 이러한 정책들은 그건 우리 기업에게 굉장히 좀 불리하지 않냐. 참 걱정이다. 이런 얘기를 하면 걱정하지 마라. 또 그것이 어쨌든 한국 기업에게 크게 피해가 안 가게끔 여러 가지 잘 풀어나갈 것이니까 그런 얘기들을 계속 하더라고요.
He also touched on the war in Ukraine, especially with North Korea's deployment of troops for Russia. He said there are certain things from the deployment that could directly threaten the peace on the Korean peninsula. Therefore, depending on Pyongyang's involvement, he isn't ruling out weapon supply to Ukraine, beginning with defensive weapons. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News.
Now, let's take a look at the stories from around the world with our Kim Xiang. Good morning, Xiang.
Good morning, Dami.
Let's begin today in California, and wildfires there, how bad are they?
That's right, Dami. The mountain fire in California's Ventura County has burned into residential areas with flames engulfing a number of homes. Now, authorities say that the fire in Ventura County, just northwest of Los Angeles, began on Wednesday morning local time. Now, it has already burned over 19,600 acres and more than 14,000 evacuation notices have been issued. Reports say that at least 2 people have been injured and several homes and structures were damaged or destroyed by fire. The California Department of Forestry and Fire Protection has stated that the fire was an immediate threat to life, calling for prompt evacuation of residents, while law enforcement has closed the area from public access. The U.S. National Weather Service has issued a particularly dangerous situation red flag alert as the fire has spread quickly, driven by strong winds. Now in Mozambique, tensions are rising as demonstrators clashed with police in the country's capital Maputo on Thursday, as protesters continue to dispute the results of the election on October 9th, which keeps the ruling Frelimo party in power. Mozambique's election authorities said the Frelimo party won the general election, but civil society group and the opposition presidential candidate, Venancio Mondlane, said it was a fraud and that the Frelimo party registered almost 900,000 fake voters among the country's electorate of 17 million. Now, according to official results, the Frelimo party's candidate, Daniel Chapo, secured over 70% of the vote, extending the party's 49 years of control over Mozambique since its independence from Portugal. While riot police fired tear gas and rubber bullets at the protesters on Thursday, Human Rights Watch said that at least 18 people had been killed in the police crackdown since the election. Australian Olympic breakdancer Raygun, who became an overnight sensation after her signature kangaroo moves won her 0 points at the Paris Olympics, has told a Sydney radio station that she will no longer compete. Now, 37-year-old Rachel Gunn said that she had intended to continue competing, but said it's too difficult now. Gunn called the backlash from the Olympics really upsetting. That includes a petition signed by over 50,000 people who accused her of manipulating the selection process for the Australian Olympic team. Now, while the breaking category debuted in Paris, it won't be part of the 2028 Games in Los Angeles as it was removed from the Olympic program. Argentine authorities on Thursday said that 3 people have been charged in connection with One Direction singer Liam Payne's death. Payne died after falling from his hotel room balcony in Buenos Aires last month. The 3 people charged includes a suspected drug dealer, a hotel employee, and a person close to the late singer. Now, all 3 has been accused of supplying Payne with drugs, while one was charged with abandonment of a person followed by death. The former boy band member's autopsy revealed that Payne had traces of alcohol, cocaine, and an antidepressant in his system when he died.
Today's morning commute was still cold enough to wear a winter jacket, but the cold snap should ease this afternoon and it should turn much more comfortable by the time we head out for lunch, rising 10 to 15 degrees higher from the chilly morning lows. Other than Jeju, we should have promising late autumn weather this weekend with temperatures staying above norms. Highs will hike near 20 degrees here in the capital. So I'm guessing many will go out for autumn hiking to enjoy the beauty of nature. And here are some tips for having a safe hike, but also note that the air is getting drier, so be careful with anything that could cause a spark. Now, checking on today's highs now, Seoul gets up to 17 degrees Celsius, Daegu topping out at 18 degrees, Busan at 20 degrees Celsius. Sunnier skies in the forecast for the upper regions today. Enjoy the pleasant autumn weather this weekend, but rain is in the forecast for Jeju on Sunday. Well, next week looks to be a warmer one into Sunung Day on Thursday. That's Korea for you, and here's a look at the international weather conditions.
That wraps up our morning edition of Arirang News. Thanks for watching.